Welcome back to Accelerated Health Radio and TV. I'm your host, Sarah Banta, and I'm here with Kate Vasquez. We're diving into anxiety, and it's a no-brainer. I'm assuming everyone listening knows that they need to clean their liver. They need to be taking their iodine because iodine is connected to high estrogen dominance, or I should say a deficiency of it. Get off the sodas, clean up your diet, stop eating the processed foods and the sugars. Those all contribute to anxiety. So once we've done all of that, Kate, what can you tell people to do? What are the three core pillars of calming that mind and the body together?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you said that because it's still important to work on those lifestyle factors, because yes, there are so many different root causes to anxiety. Food can definitely impact that if you're eating inflammatory foods, even histamines, food high in histamines. I had a couple clients where they were feeling anxious. I pulled out histamines and was like, whoa. Also, caffeine too. Caffeine is very stimulatory. It stimulates our adrenals. And actually, I remember I used to drink coffee, a cup of coffee every day, and within an hour, I had hot flashes. And now I know why, because when I tested my cortisol after that, I had high cortisol levels, and when I cut out the coffee, I no longer have the hot flashes because they were stimulating. So yeah, lifestyle factors, exercise has been is a great release when people feel stressed and anxious. Getting good quality of sleep. I know if I don't get good quality sleep, I feel very stressed and anxious and more on edge. So all these are so important. It's the foundations of what we really need with our health. But yeah, what I discovered is that the core pillars to really calm the mind and body is to also integrate and discover like what are our limiting beliefs, because these limiting beliefs, we have different beliefs. We have very superficial beliefs. So like for example, like I believe if I work out, and if I go and run on the treadmill 3 days a week, that's going to keep me healthy and in shape. And these are beliefs that we adopted and took on because maybe we heard something from someone said, okay, that's what you have to do to stay healthy, or maybe that's what our parents did. So a lot of superficial beliefs around like our health and our personal and career and stuff, like, oh, I believe I have to go and be a doctor and be successful. So that can be another superficial belief. But then there's what I call these core beliefs that are deep rooted, and we may not necessarily be aware we have these beliefs. And that I previously mentioned, one of those beliefs is I'm not good enough. And I didn't realize I had this belief until I started doing a lot of work on mindset and personal development. And I was like, oh, I did not feel I can always pin that point when I start having certain thoughts. Like for example, I would go and do something, and then if it didn't go the way I expected, like a presentation, like in school, I would beat myself up, and that's because I didn't feel like what I did was good enough. It could have always been better. And also as a PA, it's like, I was constantly, doing my best and showing up and treating the patients as best as I could, but I would receive a survey score. And if I got like less than 8 or 9, I felt like I wasn't good enough as a PA. So, I felt like the quality of who I was as a person was dependent on someone else. So just that's that need for external validation. So a lot of things, I realized like a lot of my thoughts that I thought I could pinpoint to this belief, like I'm not good enough. But I also had a belief I'm not worthy and I'm always doing something wrong. And I can pinpoint that to childhood because, obviously when you get in trouble, your parents are doing the best that they can because they want to protect you and make sure you have a better life than they had. But if you did something wrong, you got punished for it. So,
Right.
so yeah, I developed that belief as a child. Like I was scared to do something wrong, and if something happened, I'm like, oh gosh, I did something wrong. I'm always doing something wrong. Can't do it right. And these beliefs can create anxiety because now you have this fear, like if you go to do something, it's not going to be good enough. You're going to do it wrong, and it can really get in the way of you achieving like your goals and your dreams. But that also, remember, send your body into that sympathetic response because now your body feels anxiety So when we feel certain emotions like anxiety, fear, doubt, worry, even anger, frustration, resentment, that's a clue you're in that survival state. So we not only have the physical manifestation, but we have the emotional manifestations of being in that state. So yeah, so identifying what those limiting beliefs are can be very helpful, because then certain couple things you can do is like you can start writing out affirmations, because now you have to reprogram the brain to believe that you are good enough, you are worthy, you're always doing the right thing. There's no such thing as right and wrong. And and what I also realize is like, I love how you said it's like we do have a lot of thoughts per day. I think 80% of those thoughts are negative. So if we can start
Right.
identifying those negative thoughts, let's flip those thoughts around, because that can make a huge difference. So yeah, so that's the first pillar, start identifying those beliefs. And I always say the first step to calming the mind and body is awareness. So being aware of those limiting beliefs is like the first step. The second pillar is start identifying the triggers. And that was the next thing, because I'm like, okay, now that I'm aware I have this belief, I still didn't get rid of the anxiety and the migraine. So I started identifying when I got triggered, and then started getting curious. Like when my husband would say something, I'm like, ooh, why am I like all of a sudden triggered and feeling what I recognized I was going into a stress response, and there's different types of stress responses. The first one's fight, and then there's flight, freeze, and fawn. So my first response is fight, because when my husband says something, the first thing I want to do is get defensive and prove he's wrong. So then I'm like, recognize, oh, okay, he said something, it triggered me. I start to get defensive. So I take a step back and I'm like, why? Why did he trigger me? And so I started noticing, okay, certain things are triggering me, and it's sending me into that fight or flight, which is the fight is my first initial response. If that stressor continues, then I go into flight. Like I want to avoid it. Um, and then I identify the third pillar, the conditioning, because that's important to recognize too. Because the reason why you're getting triggered is based on something that happened in the past, and it also activates your core belief. So I realized when I would get triggered, it activated core belief, and then I could pinpoint it back to something that happened in my childhood. So for example, this happened like a few weeks ago. I was preparing for a master class, and my husband was like, why don't you should blah 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 blah, and I got triggered. And I was like, where's this coming from? And then I realized, oh, I could pinpoint it back to a time in childhood. Anytime I would prepare like a project or something for school, and my parents wanted to give me advice, they would say, why don't you should. And in that moment, I felt like whatever I was creating wasn't going to be good enough. So there we go, pinpointed back to that core belief. And so now I recognize, okay, this is not happening now. I'm not creating a project for school. And I can recognize that my husband was just coming from a place of love, because he just wanted me to succeed. So he was giving me advice. So then I was able to calm myself down. In the past, I would have got very defensive and like, I don't need your advice, probably could have gone into an argument. But instead, I was like, you know what? I appreciate your advice. Thank you so much. But I also recognize, I started to get a little triggered. This is what happened. So we can actually have a conversation about it and move through that. So I don't end up, going into defense mode and, having a mental breakdown or like an argument. So I really believe that identifying these three core pillars can really help move you out of that sympathetic state back into a parasympathetic state. Then you're more clear headed, you're more calm, and you can resolve situations and conflict. Because that's really what happens is like, we get anxious and stressed when we don't feel safe, when we're trying to control things that are out of control, when we get triggered because, yeah, it triggers this belief. So, can we take a step back and just, go through the process and identify what's really happening? And then from there, you can start to reprogram the brain and the mind with new beliefs and new conditioning. And so that's what I do. I help women in my program that I created called Already Enough, because it's one thing to know, but now let's dive deeper, and now let's do the work to actually reprogram the mind and the body.
As you're talking, I'm just thinking about my daughters. And I'm thinking
Mm,
about not as much as my son, because I feel like women in general are, all of us, we're not enough in our minds.
yeah.
I don't know if men have that issue as much as we do. So I guess I don't feel that tie to my son in this issue directly. But I just, as you're talking, I'm like, oh gosh, did I say that to my daughter and make her feel like she's not enough? I always try to say, help her with her goal and say,
Mm,
you're perfect in my mind, but this is my advice if you're trying to reach your goal. I'm hoping that is giving her the right confidence with making her feel enough at the same time. It's a very
mm,
fine balance, Kate.
it
Um,
is.
but it is really important. And I'm 46, and for the first time, I feel like I'm enough, and that's really sad, but it's
Yeah.
also very liberating. Finally,
Yes.
I'm there. And this is where I am trying to teach that to my
Mhm.
daughters and to my son as well, before they leave the home, because the world is so big and nasty out there, or can be, and make you feel so small. And it's okay to just rest in who you are and not put that pressure to turn up the dial. And when those triggers come, to proactively change the thought patterns and say,
Mhm.
I recognize that, I'm going to do something different this time. Because the
Exactly.
more you start doing something different, the easier it's going to become, as I'm sure you address in your teaching.
Yes.
It's just like an addiction. It's hard to change your diet or give up alcohol or whatever it is day one, but then
Yeah.
it gets easier and easier and easier. And it's the
Yeah.
same with your mind.